Largely, twists and turns in stories are all about expectation and subversion. In the case of the most extreme of these, it becomes the bait and switch. The writers present something that seems like the obvious conclusion, but then go a different way with it completely, stunning their audiences and hopefully creating a truly memorable twist. Moreover, it's even more clever when developers use our expectations of gaming traditions to do something wild and wicked. I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 shocking video game bait and switches you'll never forget. Number 10. The Electrocutioner is a pushover. Batman Arkham Origins. Being the only game in the series not developed by mainstays Rocksteady, Arkham Origins might be the black sheep of the Batman Arkham bunch, but it does have plenty to give. One particularly memorable moment is the face-off with obscure comic book baddie the Electrocutioner. Bats finds himself face to face with Lester Pachinski on Penguin's ship in a makeshift gladiatorial arena in the first major boss fight of the game. Launching into battle, Electrocutioner says, "I'll kill you, then jumpstart your heart, then kill you again," which, as far as threats go, is a little alarming. And then the player knocks Pachinski out with a single button push as Batman slams his crime-fighting boot into the bad guy's mush. Considering that Origins takes place earlier into Bruce Wayne's vigilante career, you'd think that Batman would still be finding his feet, but this scene makes the player feel as though they are truly in a position of power. More importantly, this is not the real boss fight. That comes later when the player comes back through and is against the much cooler and much tougher Deathstroke, which, even besides the comparison, is a challenging battle. And what becomes of the Electrocutioner? Well, let's just say there's a reason he's not in any of the other games. Number 9. The Fake-Out's Game Over. God of War Ragnarök. The 2018 reboots for God of War did so many cool things. It refreshed the series' setting, gameplay pace and style, reinvented the character of Kratos, and by a miracle of design all took place as part of a long single uninterrupted camera shot. As such, the game's recent follow-up Ragnarök had lofty expectations to live up to. Masterfully, it toyed with these expectations in new and inventive ways, playing with gamers' most deep-rooted understandings of mechanics. As Kratos faces off with Thor, the flurry of the fight switches between straightforward gameplay to cutscenes with quick-time events. One of these sees Kratos resisting the God of Thunder's hammer as it pushes against his hands, and try as the player might, no amount of tapping X can save them from a crushed skull. At first, it seems like any ordinary death, as the title immediately goes to the familiar tip screen. However, Thor suddenly bellows, "I say," when we're done. Pulling Kratos back to life, and by extension the player back out of the game over screen, is a stroke of fourth wall breaking genius. Players had no reason not to suspect that they hadn't just failed a QTE, and yet here Thor and the game showed the player who was boss by toying with them like a puppet on strings. Number 8. Champion Battle. Pokemon Red and Blue. Most Pokemon games start the same. You leave your quaint little town racing alongside a neighbour as you endeavour to become the very best that no one ever was. Collect the monsters, earn the gym badges, and face the Elite Four. In the original games, this culminates dozens of hours later with a tough-as-nails showdown with Lance, who practically screams final boss. Not only is he a goddamn dragon tamer, the dude wears a cape. How much more obvious do you want to be about it? Lance almost literally says, "You are now the Pokemon League champion," is what I would be saying if someone didn't beat you here. Lo and behold, and we really all should have seen it coming, but the final showdown is with that obnoxious brat next door who keeps saying "smell you later." It's become so ingrained in the franchise now that every game in the series has some kind of champion battle at the crescendo of the story, but when Pokemon was new, this was the big twist of the game. And why wouldn't it be? Pokemon is all about numbers, and the game repeatedly tells you that there are 8 gym badges to collect before you go on to face the Elite Four. It telegraphs it right there that you need to be prepared for 4 of the toughest back-to-back battles you'll ever have, except there's 5. Number 7. Dr. Mercer's Pathetic Death. Dead Space. Sometimes the scariest monsters are not the ones that want to make you suffer, but are instead those who simply do not care. To them, all you are is an obstacle, or perhaps worse still, fuel. The leading human antagonist for Dead Space is Dr. Mercer. His exposure to the alien necromorph beings have ruined his capacity for rational thoughts, and he has become a twisted fanatic. He repeatedly preaches what are essentially sermons at you about how he believes the necromorphs are the next stage of evolution and how humanity should surrender themselves to it. He throws hunters at the player, some of the toughest enemies in the game, and you grow very weary of him. After all the pain Mercer puts the player through, it feels as though a showdown and some vengeance is coming. In other horror video game franchises, like Resident Evil in particular, which was a huge inspiration on Dead Space, it would be expected for Mercer to get his wish and become a large hulking necromorphic boss fight. Right? Nope, he's just meat to the hive mind, and all of the build-up is washed away and leaves the player cold. It says more about the hive mind than Mercer that he failed to materialise into a giant gribbly monster of his own design. Instead, he is no more special to the necromorphs than any other organic material. Number 6. Shadow Futaba, Persona 5. From the outside, Persona 5 looks like a bombastic, jazzy RPG about edgy Japanese school students, and whilst some of that is true, it also handles some very big themes about injustice and emotional trauma. Throughout the game, players invade the mind palaces of corrupt and twisted individuals to bring them to justice. Within these palaces are shadow versions of the villain themselves, a distilled representation of all their darkest desires. Whilst the waking version of the person hides their truth, their shadow relishes in their greed, envy, lust, and so on, and naturally becomes the boss fight of each dungeon. At the midpoint of the game, the Phantom Thieves are invited to the palace of Futaba Sakura, a young girl who is looking to have her heart changed after suffering with the blame of her mother's passing. Seemingly antagonistic at first, Shadow Futaba leads the group through the dungeon. However, at the climactic moment, it's revealed that this shadow is in fact the positive side of her personality. As the group battles a twisted representation of Futaba's mother, Shadow Futaba confronts the real girl to bring her out of her depression and guilt. Out of all of the dungeons in Persona 5, Futaba's holds a special place for doing something different with the established formula, and introduces a new member of the party in a heartwarming way. Number 5. He's British, of course, Red Dead Redemption 2. The best open worlds are often those teeming with life, and Rockstar knows just how to add flavour to their games via interesting NPCs. The Red Dead Redemption 2 Stranger mission, He's British of course, introduces the player to Margaret, an eccentric showman who is hit a snag in his travels across America. The master of ceremonies of his own little circus, Margaret's prized exotic animals have escaped, and it's up to the player to track down and return a zebra, tiger and 2 lions. However, the zebra turns out to be nothing more than a painted up mule. Margaret explains that illusion is more powerful than the real thing, and thus the player sets off again to track down more of these acting animals. One of the lions, which was a dog in a wig, is found dead, and the body is used to lure the tiger, which is just a cougar in orange paint, back into its cage. The remaining animal is spotted at Emerald Ranch. The player follows a trail of blood, and rather suddenly, this charming little comedy jaunt comes to a vicious stop when they are charged by an actual lion. Rather than lean even more into the ridiculous nature of the quest, players are forced to stop a wild beast before it kills them in one of the most memorably surprising side missions of the game. Number 4. Fake credits, Donkey Kong Country. Dare to imagine a time in media before that feeling of awkwardly waiting in a cinema, googling to see if there's a post-credits scene. Before it became expected out of a blockbuster picture to end with a little bumper, we'd all walk off or rewind the VHS as soon as we saw the words "directed by." When developing Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, Rareware decided to have a little fun with this expectation. When players finally arrive at Gangplank Galleon, they're greeted with a cheerful little pirate ditty that doesn't exactly scream climactic showdown. The boss fight with King K. Rool seems at first underwhelming, even as the song does pick up into a rockin' 16-bit barnstormer. With the banana thieving crocodile defeated, the brief credits with a K begin to scroll and conclude with an unsure "the end?" Suddenly, K. Rool is bouncing around the stage once more and throwing his crown at you in a last-ditch attempt to come out on top. And considering that most would have relaxed and maybe even put the pad down after his original defeat, this little trick probably saw many players fall at the final hurdle. It's a charming little subversion that tops off an all-time classic that perhaps doesn't get the recognition it deserves today. Number 3. HAYTHAM KENWAY, TEMPLAR, Assassin's Creed 3. Sandwiched between the trilogy of Ezio Auditore stories and the swashbuckling Black Flag, Assassin's Creed 3 is one of the most underrated gems of the franchise. Set during the American Revolution, players take control of Haytham Kenway, a mercenary who acts on orders from his superiors. Taking on assassination missions and sneaking around like a badass, it's very much what fans are accustomed to. The player stays with Haytham for a dozen missions and witnesses him falling in love with a Mohawk woman and having a son. Then the plot twist hits. Haytham isn't a member of the Assassin Brotherhood, he's with the nefarious Templar. You think you know a guy. This backdrop is the perfect way for the game to spin on its axis, jumping ahead to the training of his son Connor, who takes up the protagonist role from his father. AC3 shakes up the series by offering a new perspective from the Templar side, but it only makes us confront this fact after we've been forced to kill people that we might have normally sided with. It creates a truly personal feud between father and son, and one of the most memorable twists in the franchise, offering insight and depth to the Templar that previously were little more than evil for the sake of evil. Number 2. Barry Burton, Traitor, Resident Evil. He might seem like an obvious villain now, but Resident Evil fans had no idea that one day Albert Wesker would become a tentacle-sprouting megalomaniac. In the original game, he was just a stern police captain who wore sunglasses all the time because he wanted to show everyone how cool he was. If the player elects to play as Jill Valentine, they are joined by elder statesman Barry Burton. When he's not talking to his colleagues about sandwiches, Barry acts flaky and strange. He seems intent on splitting up from the player. Additionally, he rolls into the situation over-prepared with a .337 Magnum revolver, a weapon that is surely not considered standard issue by any law enforcement in the world. When Dying Stars member Enrico Marini tells the player there's a mole in their midst, it seems reasonable to assume that Barry is somehow involved. However, at the end of the game, the twist becomes apparent that Barry is being blackmailed by team leader Albert Wesker. The original 1996 Resident Evil spends forever planting seeds of doubt into your mind about Barry. Depending how suspicious the player is determines the end of the game, with one such revealing the truth and then shaming the player when they come across Barry's dying moments. In the best ending, however, Barry saves Jill and gets his redemption. God bless you, Barry Burton. Number 1. Solid Snake is not the main character. Metal Gear Solid 2. In a piece of shock marketing genius, Hideo Kojima decided to make it appear as though Metal Gear Solid 2 was shaping up to be a very straightforward sequel with minimal surprises. In so doing, he guaranteed that people would talk about the game even more after its release than on the lead up. At the centre of Metal Gear Solid's wild, weaving and truly immersive plot was Solid Snake and his connection to Foxhound. Naturally, fans were eager to see Snake's next journey and where it would take him. And then, about an hour into the game, the character is seemingly killed off on board a sunken tanker, and the gaming community's collective jaws hit the floor. Not leastwise because suddenly they were playing as the clean-cut, baby-faced Raiden with his soft voice and flowing locks, the aesthetic antithesis to Solid Snake. Naturally, of course, Snake isn't dead, but either way, Raiden becomes the game's leading man. After over 20 years since its release, people still discuss today the very nature of this infamous bait and switch and its impact, with many appreciating the balls it takes to make such a shocking move, with others decrying that it was a cheap tactic that betrayed consumers' trust. Either way, Raiden was nowhere to be seen in the promotion for the game, despite the fact that he was the true protagonist of one of gaming's most anticipated sequels. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Which of these bait and switches shocked you the most, and of course let us know of any others that we've missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.